there are times when your talent, your skill level wasn't enough to book you a role. But in those times when you know you delivered the best that you could, then you have to be able to say, I did the best that I could. I gave my all, and that's the most important thing. And you have to be able to move on to the next one and do the same thing.
All right, so today I am joined by Meg Morman over in LA. Meg, how are you doing? And thank you for joining me.
You're welcome. I'm great. It's in the 80s here. It's a beautiful day out. So
normally when I say that, because I'm in the UK, I'm like, oh, well, it's raining here and it's depressing. Actually, I think it's the one day of summer that the UK gets is like happening today. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's like 20 Celsius. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit. Maybe 80. Anyway, it's warm for England.
Nice.
Yeah.
And you'd like to be outside.
I don't mind. I grew up in Madrid, so I'm used to like the hot weather. Yeah, that's fine.
It's passé to you.
Exactly. But this isn't the weather podcast, although that's a good idea for a show for someone. Let's I guess talk a little bit about how you're finding this whole weird last year or so of professionally trying to navigate this crazy thing, and what's that been like for you? And I guess retrospectively now, a year on,
sure,
how do you find it compared to where you were around this time last year?
Sure. I mean, I guess I'll go chronologically because it's easier to remember. This time last year was great. We were in the middle of, casting 2 features and busy with a couple of other things. And just, full steam ahead into the beginning of March. And then in the beginning of March, some of the smaller projects sort of said, we might hold a bit. Let's wait a second and see what's going to happen. And then I think it was maybe March 13th, people started really just shutting everything down. And so Sunny and I think it was a Thursday, we were like, well, let's not come into the office tomorrow. We can regroup on Monday, see what we need to do, if anything. We both felt like, as I'm sure many people did, that this was going to be, a few weeks, 6 weeks, something like that. And then we would be back at the office doing something. And then we still haven't been back to the office.
So oh, really? You've not been back once, huh?
Well, I mean, I've gone into the office to, check mail. And sometimes I live with my boyfriend who is also working full-time from home. And so sometimes he works for a studio, so he can't go to the office. They're completely not allowed. So sometimes I go over to my office to work just so we have some separate space.
Sure.
Right. So it's a luxury to be able to do that. Not a lot of people can do that.
Sure.
But so, yeah, I mean, I think I entered COVID thinking by June for sure, we'll be back in the office. Obviously the 2 projects we were working on last February, March didn't shoot. They are sort of like indefinitely shut down until both are movies that plan to go, but aren't in a rush. They're sort of, with a lot of independent films, they're waiting to see, right? Because the expense of full-on COVID testing prior to vaccine, and really, I think it's the chance that someone tests positive when you're doing all of that, and then you have to shut down. At one point, it was everybody had to shut down for 2 weeks, and that's very expensive for a film that's under $5 million. So most of our stuff went on hold. We were fortunate in that we have a number of international clients. And so we finished something in Canada. I had a movie that was an Israeli co-production that shot in Ukraine that I cast over the summer. And then it shot like September, October in Ukraine, because that was a period where that part of the world was much more open than we were, particularly in Los Angeles. So it was by no means a year of like normal work.
Sure.
But I was fortunate in that I had a few things that were internationally based that were able to sort of just keep the hope alive, I think, more than anything. Like, it will get back to normal or a new normal.
Whatever that means.
Whatever that means.
I guess it's better than going cold turkey as well, right? I guess, like you say, you had something just to sustain some relic to what your life was so that you weren't
Yes.
totally thrown into the abyss, which I'm sure was probably very helpful. How did you find, from like a working ways of working perspective, aside from the obvious shifts of you're working from home now and you've got Zoom and all that stuff, but I'm thinking more just from like a mindset perspective, did you find any big shifts that you had to sort of consciously navigate into, or was it just this is it now, go and then you look back and realize, oh, I've made these changes and grown?
Um, I mean, I think I've been freelance technically for about 16 years. And so with that is inherent, and we've been fortunate, we've always worked, but there's an inherent, we don't know when the next job is coming, right? So I have a little bit of practice with that.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say that the sort of June, July period of COVID, where I had expected it to end and it did not. And it didn't look there, and there was no end in sight. I think that pulled out a deeper insecurity in me emotionally that I had to figure out how to like rise above. Right. I don't think it's an irrational thing, but at the same time, I didn't want to just stay mentally in that space if I could help it. Which is why one of those projects was tremendously helpful. But I think that insecurity, that fear, when we're like, for my work, when we're in a place where there was some real fear for people's health, and then there was also immediate onslaught about fear that I think in some cases rose above the actual science-based fear.
Yeah.
So all of that is just coming in on a daily basis. And if you remember, like for the first couple of months of COVID, there was like a ticker. Every time you had the news on, it was like cases and whatever. And that just sort of, it's easy to get spun out on that.
It's hard to keep perspective when the information is from like a zillion places and you just don't know your left from your right anymore, and it's nonstop. Yeah, for
Right.
sure. So then it's grounding yourself, and it sounds like that project helped anchor you a little bit in that really rocky period. But yeah, I think what you're talking about with that uncertainty is something that from the actor side has clearly been very, very prominent. I think we've had all a deep, I don't know if it's a realization. I think we know most casting professionals are freelance for the most part, but I think there's been a bit of a, oh, they're human too. Like we know you're human, but I think there's been, with this period, the sort of walls have come down a little bit. There's been a lot of stuff happening, and it's been good to just allow, I guess, that chance for actors to see the other side of who you are as people, and that you also have the insecurities just like we do, because every actor I know, self included, was freaking out at some point as well. Like, when, not even when we're going to work again, like, when is there going to be an audition again?
Right.
Like, and how have you found that with any of the people that you've brought in from a performance perspective? I ask that because when I've spoken to people recently in the UK on the casting side, sometimes they've found that people have come in and they've not had an audition for like forever. And so now they've got this one thing. You can tell they're holding on to it more than they normally would. I don't know if you've experienced anything like that, how you've worked with people, just the weird space that they're in with this thing.
Yeah, I mean, we've had no in-person auditions.
Sure.
So then you're talking self-tapes and virtual auditions, which I greatly prefer virtual auditions over self-tape.
Okay.
And am doing as many of those as possible as opposed to just relying on self-tapes. What I will say is, sure, I've definitely, there is that pressure, right? When you're first coming back and maybe it's your first audition or your first audition for something you saw had potential for you, and there's added pressure. How could there not be? Right? You're human, and you're, regardless of whether you worked a ton or were just picking up work or whatever, there's that that expectation, like you need it to work so that you can have hope to get to the next level, right? I think we all feel that, even with some jobs that we've been up for. As things are starting to come back, I feel the same thing. It's like, I really want to nail this job interview, because I would love to be working right now, that kind of thing. So I've definitely noticed that. I think for me, the thing that's been hard is, you know, as we're getting used to technology, and is your internet connection strong enough, and is your lighting good enough, and did you make your bed if your virtual audition has to be in your room? You know, I think on one hand, actors feel that there is this huge expectation for everything to be perfect, and the second that something's not perfect, it can mentally derail you, right? And I'm not gonna lie, some people on the casting side, and not necessarily casting directors, but executives or whatever, they're having a harder time adjusting to it's not perfect because it's not in someone's studio, right? But I also think there's a lot more forgiveness on my side of things for, hey, your connection's not working out, great, sign off. I will be here for the next hour and a half. So when you figure it out, sign back on. And if you can't figure it out, we'll figure something else out, because we are all experiencing this weird time, and we're all having things that we're struggling with on adjusting to it. And so I think that there's just, I hope that there's a lot more flexibility, forgiveness, grace, patience on the side of people who are casting, because it's a lot to figure out on the side of the people who are acting.
And even then, when you have it figured out, like you said, you can't control the technology, right? And it's one less thing that you don't have to worry about. Like, the idea is focus on the material, on your performance, not all the myriad of things that could go wrong. So do you prefer the virtual stuff over self-tape because it lets you in real time give those kinds of notes and also sense a little bit of the vibe of, well, where are they at? Sure.
Yeah.
And are you getting people to perform direct to their webcam, or do you get them to set up their DSLR or something and just tape it and then send that in, or how?
No, I use, I'm primarily using EcoCast Live, which is something that Breakdown Services has. And then I've also, before EcoCast Live was up and running, I was using Zoom. So I was handling all the recording on my end, which I prefer.
Oh, you prefer to handle it all on your end?
Yes, because it's instantaneous, particularly with EcoCast Live. We're recording and then it's uploaded, and I don't have to wait for somebody to send their recording. I don't have to worry that it did or didn't work.
Gotcha. I thought you meant you preferred doing Zoom and doing that all yourself, as opposed to using, say, EcoCast Live in terms of the platforms of how you do it.
No, I prefer EcoCast Live as a platform.
Because it's done for you.
Just in general, I prefer whatever platform I use to be in charge of the recording. And then I'm usually doing the reading because it makes it an easier eye line, etc.
Gotcha. So, because for actors, it's such a new thing and a weird thing. Do you feel like it's a slightly different medium to, say, a self-tape in terms of the way they should? And then, leading question, what's I guess some of the nuances and slight differences in terms of how you would suggest actors approach Zoom or virtual auditions?
Right. I mean, obviously there is that idea of communicating, and sometimes there can be a delay, or you're really looking for cues. And if we were live and in person, you would see all my hand movements that I know I'm doing right now that you can't see. And that could give you different cues, right? Same thing happens. And this is not necessarily in the performing of the audition, but in the conversation that's happening when you're doing a virtual audition. So there's like, you just have to sort of be a little more focused, but also take a breath, right? If it's not perfect, that's okay. I think performance-wise, it is about understanding certain eye lines so that you make sure that your face stays the primary focus and that we can see your face the whole time. So it seems simple, but sometimes scenes have multiple characters that you're talking to, and you want to switch eye lines, and suddenly you're looking over here, which if you were in the room or self-taping would be totally fine. But with your flat camera in your laptop or whatever, it is not fine.
Sure.
So those kinds of adjustments are challenging. And I also think, you know, for self-tape, you can frame kind of like this. But when you're doing virtual auditions, you want to be a little bit closer because it makes it easier for me to connect with you. Because in a self-tape, I'm not necessarily looking to connect you, I'm watching you. But in a virtual audition, I'm looking to connect with you. because I'm reading you and I'm experiencing you in the moment.
That's really interesting. No one's put it that way before, but I think that's such a nuanced distinction, and it makes a lot of sense. And how does that resonate when it comes to things like movement? Obviously, with a closer frame, do you like people to pick a moment if it feels natural and organic to maybe move in a little bit, or is that too much?
I mean, I don't mind movement. And your phrasing of natural and organic is key in that, right?
Sure.
I don't mind movement, and sometimes you're going to have scenes where you have to pull back in order to show some action, right? But those are such small pieces of the overall audition that you shouldn't be afraid to do that and feel like, oh no, I have to be this close all the time. But you also don't want to get this close, because then it's an invasion of space. Even though you're not actually in my space, for whatever reason, we still feel
Sure.
like our personal space has been invaded.
Well, we all live on Zoom now, so it makes
I,
total sense, right? Like
yeah.
it is get out of my box. It literally is
Yes.
like this is the most. It's like if Black Mirror did the Brady Bunch or something, and this is kind of the
They
world
should
we're
steal your
living.
idea.
They yeah. I was gonna say they shouldn't, but yeah, they will anyway. Um, do you think we'll go back to in-room stuff in sort of full scale eventually, or do you think that this is now going to be more of a, well, we'll use a little bit of the virtual and more self-taping for like first rounds and bring back in person for when it's needed? What's your take on that?
Well, I mean, I think it'll vary from office to office. There are definitely offices that will absolutely stay with a self-tape pre-read model. I do think that ultimately, I think everybody or most people are going to end up back in-person callbacks, chemistry reads, tests, things like that, because you do lose something
Sure.
when you are not in person. And I think it will affect the overall product if we aren't able to do that in person eventually. I would love to be more in person than self tape personally. There's just going to be, at least for the next little while, even once people are vaccinated and so forth. Like I used to be able to have 10 people sitting in my waiting room. And I don't think, at least not with the size of my personal waiting room, that we're going to necessarily get back to that.
Sure. Sure.
So things are going to be more spread out, which then makes them less efficient for me. And we are already a profession that is given a tiny amount of time to do the volume of work that we need to do. So that is also where self tapes make our job more possible.
Mm-hmm. And I guess it lets you reach potentially more people than you otherwise would. With that in mind, do you ever feel like you would sort of spread the net wider than just say the local hire? If it can go wider than local hires, would you sort of go national and sort of do that for smaller roles if the person could be local? I mean, I guess my question is more around, are you, because it's a first read and virtual, happy to look at people from anywhere if then there's a chance for them to come in later for the second person?
I mean, that's truly dictated by the production,
Okay, sure.
not me. In that, if there's no way my production is ever going to be able to bring you in, or even let's say you're happy to bring yourself in, but I'm on a short timeline, so I'm going to hire somebody
Sure.
and need them in LA within 48 hours. Well, that's just
Yeah,
not
yeah, yeah.
reasonable.
Yeah.
So for me, I've always looked at people outside of being local if the production allowed it.
Mhm.
I've looked far, and a number of the things that I've cast have not shot in LA. They've shot all over the country, all over the world. And so, and particularly in those situations, you have a lot more flexibility. If something's shooting in, northern Illinois, Wisconsin, they're bringing most people in. So I can look for people from anywhere.
Sure.
Our movie that shot in Ukraine, we were bringing everybody in. So I looked at people in Canada and the UK and the United States, because we were bringing, it didn't matter.
How
Um,
do you dovetail with local casting offices from that side of things, like, or you just do it all yourselves?
Usually do it all myself.
Okay.
Yeah. I have done one project with an Israeli production company that shot in Israel, and they did the casting of the Israelis with an Israeli casting director,
That's
which
it.
made a lot of sense.
Sure.
Much earlier in my career, we would do that. We would work with local casting directors, but we just found the process easier for us to do it ourselves. Canadian co-productions are different. They use Canadian casting directors for a portion, and then we do another portion. But I also did my film that was shooting right before COVID started and then had to shut down in the middle of their shoot and then start up again in July. It's a Canadian production, and we cast all the roles. People based in Toronto and people based in LA. So.
Did they have to recast any of that because of sort of?
They didn't.
Okay,
actually. Yeah. I think that's one of the advantages in that. So they did the reshoots July, August, and Canada was open at that point. And so we could bring the 2 people from LA that we needed to for work, and just quarantine them. And then and ultimately nobody's working. So there wasn't like a conflict on reshoots because everybody was sitting at home waiting to be able to work again.
Just pick a start date and then quarantine accordingly, I guess, and go from there.
Exactly.
So you mentioned a little bit about when you guys were starting out and the process you had there. I'd like, maybe if we can, to just hear a little bit about how you and Sunny work together and sort of how your dynamic works, and how that's maybe evolved over all the years you've worked together as well. I'm sure it must have grown and changed over time.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I mean, initially when we started, we were both, it was just the 2 of us, no assistants, nothing like that. And, we had an office space where we both worked out of. We also taped out of it. So everything was just, we were both doing everything all the time. So one of us would run camera, one of us would read, and we would both be daily involved in the minutia of every project we did. As time went on, we started working on more projects and things like that. It became a smarter sort of division of work and to have us run points. So now what we do is we are both involved in the creative aspects of all the projects, and we're both at all the meetings with directors, producers. We're putting together lists. We're both at all the callbacks and things like that. But as far as like the daily, the pre-reads, the submissions, the hundreds of emails you get every day, we'll divide that. And so that way also there's not double work being done.
Sure.
And a director or producer they have a point of contact, right? So they don't have to worry, am I telling Sunny what our conversation was? Is she telling me what her last conversation was? We do communicate with each other because we've had our company for 16 years and we have a system and so forth, but we divide the projects up so that we each run point on different things.
How do you decide who's the point person then? Is it based on the relationship? Is it time related?
All of those things.
All of the above.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when it comes to, you mentioned assistants there and having people, and what was that like to sort of have that shift from doing everything to then becoming, I guess, more managerial and sort of having to let go of some of that? Was that easy, or was an easy process, an easy shift?
No, it was not easy.
I was going to say, yeah, because I was curious to understand maybe how that period was for you both and how you were able to let go or be pulled away from that so you could have others do it.
I mean, I found it challenging personally, just because I'm so used to doing all of that stuff. And in the beginning, when you're training someone, even if they're great, you're training them in how to work for you, even if they've worked for someone else. And so there's subtle differences. And so it took me a minute to have the patience to say, all right, this is going to be slower for a little while, and then it's going to be faster. And I just have to trust that eventually it's going to be faster. And we've been fortunate to have some really great people work for us that made that transition much easier than I think it would have been otherwise. But yeah, of course, it's when you're used to doing everything and you like things done a certain way, it can be really challenging to let go of that. But it's the right thing to do in the long run. And I started by being an intern and then moving up, and all of our assistants that we've had have been our interns and then moved up. And I really believe in that process. And the process only works if the person you're working for is willing to give you more and more responsibility and trust. So.
And then it's that thing of they grow, but also I guess for you both, you can grow because your time's freed up to focus on all these other things. And I'm assuming a lot of that then becomes around relationship building and pitching for projects. Um, I guess beyond just the general word of mouth for how you get new work,
Mhm.
are those the two main ways that you guys normally find new projects? Is it just going out to pitch for tender and relationships, or what's that process like, I guess, because we don't really hear about it that much.
Sure. I mean, we have agents that are in our corner that bring us up and pitch us for things and send their directing and producing clients to us. We hear about things and try and, leverage relationships to get meetings on them sometimes. I mean, most of it is word of mouth,
Mhm.
whether someone's seen something we've done or they know someone we've worked with. And we've worked in the business long enough that tends to, I mean, we're fortunate it keeps happening. The word of mouth train.
Terrible. How awful.
I know.
That's horrific.
uh, but yeah, I mean, all of the above, right? We put
Sure.
ourselves out there, we market ourselves. Um, we take meetings just to take meetings to meet people to hopefully have a working relationship down the line. If I see a project that I really loved and sometimes there isn't a casting director on it, the director did it themselves, I might reach out to that person and just tell them that I truly love their project in the hopes of starting a relationship. I think, very similarly to actors, right? You have to sometimes think outside the box. You can't be afraid to go forward and believe in yourself and pitch yourself. Um, and you also have to be smart about it.
I think I was waiting. I was like, but there's a caveat to that, right, Megan? Yeah, it's pick and choose your moments and have something relatable to say, and be in the
Yeah,
right wheelhouse of what they're doing, not just I'm an actor, they cast stuff. Let's go talk.
right.
I mean,
Exactly.
so you're obviously not spaghetti slinging. I guess you have specific sort of areas you generally gravitate towards more. Do you find that that's thematic? Is it genre based? Like, what draws you guys to a particular project?
It's definitely not genre based. We've
Mhm.
worked in pretty much all the genres, which I like that because it keeps things interesting. Um, Personally, I like a story that is character driven, that really, because if there's a lot of great acting that needs to be done, then that shows off the casting that's done, right? And so I like that. And I also like scripts that have some sort of message
Mhm.
that, you know, ideally leave me hopeful or at least leave me thinking at the end of the story. So those are sort of my ideal things to work on,
Mhm.
where the acting is really it calls for great acting, and that can be in any genre, right? That can be a comedy, that can be a dark drama, that can be a horror film that needs some like really great acting depending on what it is.
Sure.
So
Yeah, look at Get Out. I mean, that was just,
yeah,
as an example of a genre that doesn't hit all the tropes of a traditional horror genre necessarily, but makes you think.
exactly. No, it's a great. Yeah, it's a great example.
It sounds a little bit then that sort of the indie film world is probably more the area that you would feel happiest with. I don't want to put words in your mouth too much, but I am anyway. But that seems to be where the kind of stuff you're talking about resides for the most part. Do you feel like that's where you prefer to operate, or am I just digging a hole?
No, 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 you're not digging. No, no, not at all. I was just trying to think of examples of studio films. It's interesting because the film world, what is considered indie
Sure.
versus studio, has certainly shifted in the last 10 years, even less. And so, yes, I would agree that traditionally speaking, the things that I am more attracted to are independent films. I mean, I started out at 20th Century Fox in the feature casting department there. And when I was there, we worked on Unfaithful with Adrian Lyne. That was a studio film, but is a great director, an amazing cast, a really cool script, a genre. So there are certainly those films that fall under the studio world that I would love to work on. Um,
But does it feel like there's maybe less of those kinds of things being made at the studios now compared to before? Or is that just a weird misconception because there is so much more noise around like the superhero stuff and all of that?
Right. I think certainly the superhero, the tent poles are what's making people money, right?
Sure.
But what is the name of the script or the movie is escaping me right now.
Okay.
But Denzel Washington movie this year that was a Warner Brothers movie with Jared Leto.
Oh, I know the one you mean. Again,
I want to say Dirty Pretty Things, but I don't know that that's right.
I don't
It's
think
something
that's
is in the title. I apologize for not knowing it. That would have been great to work on. I believe Denise Champion cast it and she did a great job, but like that kind of movie, it's a little bit of a thriller. It's definitely all about the acting and it's cool. It's not an uplifting story by any means, but it's a cool story. So things like that, I would be excited to be a part of for
gotcha.
sure.
Sure. Do you feel like the kind of nature of content like that is going to be not changing, but there's going to be more scope for it as we have even more and more with the streamers and you got
Mm-hmm.
Netflix and Amazon and Apple and all these guys, and they're not just the distributors, but a lot of them are also creating the content too, right? So it still feels like it's early days with that.
Mm-hmm.
But what's your view on how you think it maybe could evolve? And I'm thinking now specifically for independent filmmakers because it
Mm-hmm.
might give them a chance that they otherwise wouldn't have had. Would you agree with that?
I mean, I feel like it's definitely going that way, which there's a bigger budget. There's going to be a bigger budget disparity with that as well, um, because those movies just generally aren't as expensive to make because they don't have action and they don't have a lot of. Some will have some, visual effects, but most of them aren't going to have a ton of the action or visual effects or things like that, unless it's like a period piece, and then there's a whole different kind of expense. But yeah, I mean, I think more of those things as Netflix and Hulu and Amazon and Apple are making original content that truly is original content, right? It's not a negative pickup that they are calling original content, but they're really developing things and producing things. Then, and there's definitely in the last year, has been a much bigger audience for that stuff. And I don't think that's necessarily going away.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it's going to oversaturate at any point, or do you think it's just now there'll be more niches? So you might know a bunch of films that I've never heard of just because I'm drawn to particular things and that's what gets spit out at me. Do you think that there's going to be this fragmentation maybe, or will there still be films that we all know and watch and adore?
I'm sure there'll still be films that we all know and watch and adore, but like it's the same thing with television, right? Like there is a ton of series content, right? And even if you want to say arbitrarily, let's just say there's like 15 shows that are really great. The average person might have watched half of those,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just because how much time do you have? And they're not going to appeal to everybody. And I think the same thing happens in film. So I don't, sure, you could call that oversaturation, but I also think it's exciting that there's so much more content out there that gives more people opportunity. And suits more people's viewing, right? Like my boyfriend and I do not like watching the same kinds of things, but so we both watch each other's shows. There's like an overlap of the things we watch, and then there's a couple things that I'm only watching or he's only watching. But with the more content that's out there, the more chance there is for us to have more overlaps of what we want to watch too.
Sure. Thank God for those multiple profiles on Netflix and Amazon, right? So you can otherwise their algorithm is going to be like, hey, why do you like this and this? That doesn't make any kind of sense. But you're right. I mean, especially, from the actor's point of view, there's more and more happening than ever before. So in theory, there's just loads more opportunities for work. And it feels like obviously stuff's always been filming all over the place, but it seems, especially with the last year, stuff's happening in places that it wasn't even happening before from a shooting perspective. That's partly down to just COVID restrictions, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But it almost, I don't know, it feels like not a neutralizing of your main sort of cities for the industry, LA, New York, London. They're still going to be the sort of pillars. But do you
Mhm.
feel like other places are going to start to get a little bit more of a foothold or an even grounding in that, or do you think it's always going to be still those main few markets?
I don't know. I have a hard time seeing a lot of markets popping up with the, depth of available talent, equipment, whatever, as exists in New York, LA, and I mean, Atlanta's a huge market now.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the size of LA, but it is a humongous market. I don't know that the business is going to really support another 6 of those,
Sure, sure.
right? Um, but maybe, I don't know. I
We'll
think
see.
more what's going to happen is the stuff that's happening in New York, LA, Atlanta is going to have to be flexible about bringing more people to them.
Right.
The infrastructure they already have set up, as people during COVID have scattered and realized, I would rather live in this place and have someone bring me or get myself to LA for those times that I really need to.
Yeah, there seems like there's been that shift quite a lot where people are looking at the work-life balance and where am I happy and where
Right.
can I live that I enjoy, but also isn't necessarily going to purge my bank account. And there's more of a choice around location independence, which I think has its pros and cons, but can only be good in the long run just for the mindset of the individual. Um,
For sure.
which is something that I guess I do seem to always fall back on a lot when I'm talking to people here. And, we end up talking a lot about this idea of technique and then mindset from a performance perspective.
Mhm, mhm,
And obviously, technique's essential and you have to be
mhm,
trained and know how to perform.
mhm.
But would you agree that at a certain point, talent's not the main question and barometer anymore because whoever you bring in is going to have talent. And so then it's
Mhm.
more about the fit and how they mix with the other parts of the big jigsaw you're putting together. But from the actor's side, to navigate that whirlwind, at what point do you feel mindset and self-awareness and a discipline in that sort of side of their life is just as, if not maybe more important than only relying on technique?
I mean, honestly, I think the two have to be developed hand in hand from the beginning of your career,
That's where we go
right?
wrong. Ooh, ooh. Mindset
I
from the
mean,
beginning of the career. God, see,
yes.
that's why people shouldn't be child actors. And I'm saying that like whimsically, but also like
Mhm.
you don't know anything until you're at least like early mid 20s, and that's at best.
Well, but like, I think the beginning of that, whether you're doing it when you're 6 or 40, is the beginning of having a healthy mindset, right? We all know how to train and go to get good technique. The beginning of having a healthy mindset is having other interests, other things that are important in your life. So if you are a parent of a kid actor, the acting cannot be the only thing they do.
Mm-hmm.
They have to, if they like baseball, if they like, knitting, I don't know, that there have to be friends that are not actors. There have to be trips that are not around like, and that's just for all humans, right? Because if you become too laser focused on it, that's when, going back to what you said earlier about people who are just getting auditions, the first audition now, that's when you have so much pressure, right? Because it becomes such a desperate space for you, understandably. But self-awareness is also key, because, and you're absolutely right, like, there are times when your talent, your skill level wasn't enough to book you a role. But in those times when you delivered the best that you could, then you have to be able to say, I did the best that I could. I gave my all. And that's the most important thing. And you have to be able to move on to the next one and do the same thing. Because like the examples you gave, whether it's the right fit, the right look or whatever, like, you have zero control over that.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be able to give over the control on that and just say, all right, the things that I have control over are, how did I do that scene? How well did I prepare for my audition? You know, did I deliver what I intended to deliver? And if the answers are yes, then that is where that mindset, that self-awareness, that interest in a bigger life than you're acting alone takes over.
And then that feeds into the acting, and it's all then just symbiotic, because obviously the life experiences give you more to play with and just inform your choices and decisions. And I think it's good that these conversations happen more and more, because it seemed, at least a while ago, that, you know, there's this thing of don't talk about other stuff that you do. Like if you have another job, you know, like, no, you like, what if you work as like a realtor, don't talk about that, or whatever it might be. And it feels like that shift is pretty much fully happened now, where it's a case of, number one, we accept that people have other jobs because they have to survive and pay rent. And number two, maybe it's a tangible skill that could be useful to know for a project, or, you know, the realization that we're human, and as actors, we can let ourselves be human. It sounds really stupid to say out loud, but it's.
No, but how about the idea that you're allowed to have more than one interest?
Don't be crazy now, Meg. I mean, come on.
I mean,
what if carried away?
Real estate? What if you get a thrill from working in real estate? And isn't it great that it also pays the bills? So the other thing you get a thrill from acting, you can do too.
Sure.
Right? Like,
it doesn't make you any less professional of an actor, that, you know. No. And again, this is the mindset thing that I think,
which I totally understand. But what I would counter that to as well is, when you think about whether you're at an audition or when we're all out socializing again and you're at an industry event or something and you're striking up a conversation, like the last thing I want to hear about from an actor is all the auditions they've been on.
Sure.
Like if you just shot something cool, that's totally different. But if you say, oh, well, I also do real estate and the market has been amazing and I really blah, 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 suddenly now I remember you in a way that is more natural networking, relationship building. Like now we're building a relationship. I'm not just hearing your resume or like a list of the jobs you didn't get or things like that. I am actually remembering, oh, you know, because I might think of you and be like, oh, what was his name? I know it's the guy that I talked to that also does real estate. Remember him? And then, you know, we're all human beings wanting to have human interactions, right? Like, you know about my dog. And so that makes me different maybe than the last person you interviewed, because it's just a human conversation and that's what we're looking for.
Crazy. It's crazy talk. No. I mean, I need you to tell me how many people email you after this saying they're realtors, by the way, just in case we've opened Pandora's box there or something. Amazing. Well, look, Meg, I like to wrap these up with 10 quick fire questions, which I've stolen from inside the actor studio, because, you know, all good art is stolen. So if you're happy, let's just rattle through these quickly, and whatever your instinctive response is, go with what that gut feeling is. So the first question is, what is your favorite word?
Joy.
What is your least favorite word?
Moist.
You're the second person that said that in like literally the last 2 weeks.
My boyfriend and I just had that conversation yesterday, so it's at the top of my head, but it's true.
And my response will be the same as I gave to that person, which is understandable and fair enough. The next question is, what turns you on creatively?
Collaboration.
And then the flip is, what turns you off?
Closed minds.
Next question is optional, because it's, what's your favorite swear words? If you don't want to swear on camera, that's okay. But if you do, have at it, because I do swear like a chimney, just not today.
I mean, gosh, I definitely use fuck a lot. Can I call it a favorite? I don't know that I have a favorite, but that's probably my go-to.
Mm-hmm. It's like the multi-use, all-purpose tool for.
I'm not original in that one.
Sometimes we don't have to be, you know, originality can be overrated sometimes. It's what feels good, and it's got some weight behind it. The next question is, what is your favorite sound?
Right now, my niece is saying my name, and so that's pretty cool to hear.
Is she super, how old is she? Like really young?
She's 2.
Oh, wow. Okay. Is she saying your name and not the parents' names? Like no mom and dad, just your name?
No, but she lives
Uh,
in Ohio on the other side of the country, so I don't see her as often. So she says she's very verbal. She has lots of different things she says, but she recognizes me more regularly now so that she knows who they're talking about, even if I'm not in the room. And so then she'll send me little videos saying, Aunt Meg, Aunt Meg. And so it's that whole recognition and real relationship that we're building because she's old enough to remember who I am when she only sees me a couple times a year.
amazing.
So, yeah.
What's your least favorite word? No, sound,
Oh,
noise. Sorry,
sound.
I said that already.
That's okay. Least favorite sound. That's a good one. Oh, you know what? My boyfriend loves to play the radio, NPR, all day long. Every once in a while, it'll become half NPR, and it's very low volume, half NPR, half static. So it's not irritating loud static, but it's just that low background static with a few words every once in a while. And that drives me crazy as of late.
Okay.
Makes me think.
That's lockdown pandemic kind of
Yeah.
stuff there a little bit, I think. What job or profession other than your own or ones you've done would you most like to attempt?
Mm. I think right now, dog trainer is randomly at the top of my list because I really enjoy teaching my dog things and having her learn. But if there's a way to get paid to just travel and experience life and share what you experience, that would be lovely.
You got to be one of those travel bloggers. Got to. That sounds like a lot more work than it actually, I
Right?
think, comes across. Though I think they're doing crazy hours, and I don't know if filming yourself every day. I don't know. It
I
seems
don't
a bit
think I have
much.
the energy for that.
Yeah. What job would you never want to do under any circumstance?
Mm, IT.
Hmm. Just generally anything IT based.
I feel like people in IT, I'm not super technically savvy, but then you have to have a tremendous amount of patience with people because you have a knowledge that far surpasses the people that usually need your help.
Okay. So it's more about having the patience with other people who can't catch up as opposed to the job itself, or is it literally
No,
just
it's both. It's
both,
both.
both, both?
Because it's not an area that I'm interested in on top of that.
Gotcha. Cool. Final question, a little bit more of an ethereal one. It's what would you like the story of your life to be? What kind of legacy do you want to leave behind?
Mm, that the people I loved knew how much I loved them. Felt it on a regular basis.
Awesome. Cool. Well, look, Meg, final few moments to you. Really let people know where they can connect with you, and beyond that, what's the big takeaway or final message you'd want to leave people with who are tuning in to button this off today?
Best way to communicate with me currently is probably social media, Instagram. We're at Morman Boling, Facebook, Morman Boling. So those typical things are the easiest ways to get my attention right now when nobody's really going to an office. And I think we just all need to keep the faith that things are coming back and hang on and just stay creatively fulfilled. Like, even if it's just a little thing you do every day that feeds you creatively, it doesn't have to be a big one. I think those little things add up over time to making you feel stronger, both in your acting and in your life.